My mother was about 23 years old when women got the vote, and she was thrilled that she was going to be able to vote.
13 years after it took effect in 1920, the 18th Amendment was repealed, lifting the ban on alcohol. It stands as the only instance in which an amendment to the Constitution has been repealed. Consequently, many today deem the temperance movement as an insignificant and misdirected movement in American history. In actuality, the seemingly failed efforts of the temperance movement left a legacy far greater. In the 1830s, as women began to advocate for social responsibilities in response to the abuse of alcohol, the empowerment of women that resulted from their involvement in the temperance movement became key to their efforts in advocating for the right to vote through the suffrage movement.
You can't do nothing 'cause you drink too much. I give you money to pay a bill.
As the 19th century in America unfolded, alcohol consumption was at a high level in history. Excessive and obsessive drinking habits took a hold of America, tearing families apart and damaging domestic relationships.
Alcohol consumption at that point was a sign of masculinity that took away masculinity. So that you drank to show that you were a man, but you get drunk and all of a sudden you can't provide for your family, you can't do your job, you become violent.
Faced with such destabilizing circumstances, women joined together to eradicate the problem, taking up their responsibilities as the mothers of families and women in society. This marked the beginning of the temperance movement.
Yeah, man.
The temperance movement, initiated by men such as Reverend John Edgar and Joseph Livesey, at first rejected the involvement of women. In March 1853, the New York State Sons of Temperance denied Susan B. Anthony the permission to speak. In response, the women withdrew and made plans to call a state women's temperance convention. This would mark one of the events that first launched women into leadership roles in American society.
The temperance movement was extremely important to women because of the direct effect on them and their families of men spending their incomes in saloons and taverns. And that's what motivated a lot of the activist women.
As time progressed, the temperance movement was dominated by the involvement of women. It became not only a fight against the excessive use of alcohol, but also a fight for the improvement of women's rights. Through their efforts, women were able to build and develop the skills that would take them further towards achieving prohibition and then the right to vote.
Society they live in. If you think about it, the beginning of the WCTU was within just a few years of the end of the Civil War, and it lets us know that that women were really eager to help shape the society they lived in, and not content to do so merely by raising their children in a certain way or supporting their men.
Through the temperance movement, women learned how to articulate their views, organize their efforts, and advance their status as leaders in society. The methods that women used in their efforts to promote prohibition helped in the further struggle for the right to vote. Amelia Bloomer founded the Lily in 1850 and used the newspaper to tell horror stories about the effects of alcohol and to rally support for temperance. Bloomer utilized the newspaper as a way to articulate women's opinions through writing, and she strove to make known their unheard voice. But though the Lily began as a voice for women in the temperance movement, time progressed and directions turned, transforming the newspaper to embody the fight for women's suffrage. It addressed women across the nation, calling for their support for the common desire for the vote. The Women's Christian Temperance Union was founded in 1874 and began to effectively organize opposition to alcohol by holding meetings and organizing protests. Eventually, by 1921, there were more than 300,000 women in local unions of the WCTU. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton initially rose to prominence through the temperance movement. They founded the New York State Women's Temperance Society and later the American Equal Rights and the American Woman Suffrage Associations. Using the experience they had gained from their involvement in the temperance movement, women enlarged their organized efforts to expand the women's suffrage movement. These organizations would be key in removing limitations that women faced in society. Under their leadership, women tackled the fear of public speaking and stood as a united force in society. In 1879, Frances Willard, then president of the WCTU, encouraged her members to support suffrage to advance the cause of prohibition. Willard started the motto, "Do everything," a phrase that naturally linked the suffrage and temperance movements. Under her leadership, the WCTU believed that all reform was connected and that social problems cannot be separated. By 1894, the WCTU endorsed women's suffrage. In the 19th century, the WCTU grew to become one of the largest organizations in the nation. Due to its decentralized structure and participation in many other social reforms, it was successful as an organization that pressed for prohibition and suffrage. In little time, the lines that separated the suffrage and temperance movements disappeared completely, and the two movements became inseparable. On January 16, 1919, the 18th Amendment was ratified, and prohibition was achieved in the U.S. Even without the power of the vote, women were influential. Their ability to unite for reform in the temperance movement verified their readiness to responsibly participate in the political process. Having shown that they could bear the social responsibilities without the right to vote, they earned the right to vote. And on August 18, 1920, a little over a year after the passing of the 18th Amendment, the 19th Amendment was ratified, opening the way for women to take part in their government by voting. After the Prohibition Amendment was enacted, it was repealed 13 years later in 1933. The temperance movement, though viewed to be transient and ineffectual, has left a far greater legacy. As this wheel for social responsibility turned, it affected a greater mechanism. Like the movement of these two interlocking wheels, the temperance movement advanced the suffrage movement. The temperance movement changed the role of women in society by transitioning them from the role of followers to leaders. Women united in their sharing of similar goals, and this connection pushed them to the forefront of the suffrage movement. Prohibition empowered a sense of social responsibility in women, which enabled them to strive for the right to vote. The temperance movement, a short-lived expression of social responsibility, but forever an indispensable part of the history of the advancement of the rights of women.
Now they demanded the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave it to them. American women, American women. In Seneca Falls, New York, 18